So do you think the Antichrist is a person, many persons, or a system?
Well, from what is said in the New Testament, the Antichrist was many people.
Do you have any idea of what the Antichrist is? Is it a person, is it a place, a system?
No, but usually if it has to do with anything regarding religion, I stay away from it.
The Antichrist, is it a system? Is it a person? You were explaining a little bit about it, but what is it in just one or two words?
The Antichrist is actually is a person. I met him actually the other day. It was a white guy. He was saying his name was Jesus. He had a cigarette in his mouth, and he told me he was going to walk across the water. I think it's a person, yeah.
To you, is the Antichrist something that is here, or that is something from the past, or that will be in the future?
To me, it's a presence. To me, it's a presence that's always here.
The word Antichrist appears just a few times in Scripture, 4 in fact, and always in the writings of John, in his epistles.
The Bible teaches that the word Antichrist not only means against Christ, but actually in the place of Christ.
You don't find the word itself, but just in a few places. But the career and the person of this Antichrist figure, you find it in numerous places. Daniel in the Old Testament primarily, but then in the New Testament, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, you find it Revelation 13, and Jesus here, obviously speaking to the issue of this Antichrist figure.
The picture we get in the Bible is not necessarily someone who is dark and evil in appearance, but actually someone who appears to be like Christ.
When we actually go to the book of Daniel, the book that Jesus specifically said that we should reference in an end-time context, we find that there was one chapter there in particular, well, two, but one that really stands out, and that's Daniel chapter 7. Now, in Daniel chapter 7, we actually just have the outworking of something that Daniel has already disclosed in Daniel chapter 2.
Now, in chapter 2, we have a very important dream that the king Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon had.
And in the dream, there's this metal man, this metal image, and the man has different parts of his body. The idol has different parts of his body that are made of different metals. He's a giant metal man, and according to Daniel's own interpretation of the prophecy, we don't have to guess, we don't have to wonder, he gives it to us. This metal man is a kind of timeline, a kind of chronological sequence progressing from the head of gold to the chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, long legs of iron, and then the feet partly of iron and partly of clay.
It starts, obviously, as it is told in chapter 2, and the prophet Daniel is the person to tell Nebuchadnezzar that the golden head is Babylon.
And here you have this timeline, this sweep of history, if you will, going from Babylon to Medo-Persia to Greece, Greece to Rome, and finally the division of Rome. Now, when we come to Daniel chapter 7, we find that same sequence recapitulated, revisited.
Now, when we come to Daniel 7, we see that this time Daniel himself receives a vision. And it's totally different from the one in Daniel 2, but at the same time, it is similar.
The message of these two dreams is the same, but they are given in a different context. To the pagan king Nebuchadnezzar, the dream comes in the form of a gigantic statue, an idol, if you please. Not because God approves of idols, but because he can use that to communicate with a man who knows nothing better.
When we get to Daniel chapter 7, however, the metal man is now replaced. He's replaced with beasts, 4 beasts.
In Daniel 7, it begins with these 4 beasts, and it tells us very clearly in Daniel 7, verse 17, that the beasts represent kings or kingdoms.
Just as Daniel was told, now we discover these 4 beasts are 4 consecutive kingdoms and empires, just like the 4 metals of Daniel 2.
And the first beast that comes up is a lion, and he has wings like an eagle, so obviously symbolic.
The lion is like the golden head of the image in chapter 2, which would mean the lion with the eagle's wings stands for Babylon.
The lion with the eagle's wings was almost like the bald eagle in the United States of America. I mean, it was their national symbol.
And you even have texts like in Jeremiah 49, where it speaks about Babylon being a lion and being an eagle.
When you walked down the processional way in ancient Babylon, it was lined on either side with these giant lions with eagle's wings.
So we have evidence from Scripture and evidence from archaeology telling us that the lion with eagle's wings is a very appropriate picture of Babylon.
The first beast, the lion with eagle's wings, is followed by a bear.
And two significant details here. The bear has 3 ribs in the mouth. Not 4, not 2, not 5, but 3 ribs in the mouth. And the bear is hunched up on one side, Scripture says.
And that shows that the alliance between the Medes and the Persians was not an alliance of equals, that the Persians were actually stronger than the Medes. That's why the bear's humped up on one side. And then it says it has 3 ribs in its mouth.
The 3 ribs are the 3 provinces of Babylon that needed to be conquered in order for Medo-Persia to come to prominence.
It had to overthrow Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt. I think the precision of the biblical language is remarkable.
But even Medo-Persia would not stay forever. And what follows Medo-Persia is a 4-headed leopard. And Scripture says it has 4 wings of a bird.
Who comes after the Persians? Of course, the Greeks came. And it's interesting that the Greeks are depicted by a leopard with 4 heads.
After Alexander's death, there was no single man, no single general that was charismatic enough, influential enough, powerful enough to step right into those gigantic shoes. I mean, we don't call him Alexander the Great for nothing, right?
Alexander died when he was really young, in his 30s, and he was planning to make Babylon the capital. He had already started the city of Alexandria, very modestly named after himself, right? And he wanted Babylon to be the capital. He was going to rebuild it. However, when he died, his dreams died with him.
And so what ended up happening to Alexander's empire, his great empire, is that it was actually significantly divided into 4 parts.
The 4 heads are the 4 kingdoms that came because Greece was divided after the death of Alexander the Great.
Now think about that. Scripture says that it was a leopard with 4 heads. And you have these 4 generals, Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. And they're all going to different parts of Alexander's empire because he died at such a young age. Victor Hugo, the historian, famously said that Alexander could conquer the world, but he couldn't conquer himself.
This 3rd beast was followed by a 4th beast, and that 4th beast is a symbol of the Roman Empire.
Interestingly enough, Daniel cannot think of any description, any animal in the natural world to describe this beast.
Something about this 4th beast defied description. It was just ferocious and mean and powerful.
He says, it was dreadful and terrible, and it was exceedingly strong.
And for a very significant tie-in to Daniel chapter 2, which is the sort of archetypal prophecy here, it has iron teeth. Iron teeth, which reminds us of the iron legs of Daniel chapter 2.
And those iron teeth obviously correspond to the legs of iron in the vision of Daniel 2.
And of course, this ferocious, nondescript beast that apparently reigns for a long time corresponds with the iron monarchy of Rome.
Rome came on the scene, and Rome was much more powerful than the others, ruled a larger territory, including large parts of Europe, all the way up to the borders of Scotland. Julius Caesar conquered England, he conquered Gaul, which was France. It was a huge empire and very powerful for a very long time.
And so what we're finding in Daniel chapter 7 is really just a revisiting or a recapitulation of what we saw in Daniel chapter 2. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome. That's what we see in Daniel 2. When we go to Daniel 7, we see the same progression. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome.
He says he was looking at the horns that came out of the beast. Now, the same chapter tells us that the 10 horns were kings, were powers.
Now, there is something significant here, I think, and that is that you have the feet, partly of iron and partly of clay, in Daniel chapter 2, and you have 10 toes. And this beast, very significantly, who we have identified as Rome, a ferocious, terrible, strange, very brutal beast, has 10 horns. So you see correspondence here, not just with the iron to iron, but with the 10 toes to the 10 horns.
And the final phase, which is not a kingdom, but it's following Rome, it's a breakup into iron and clay, which don't really mix together. So it's sort of a division of the Roman Empire.
Now, the Roman Empire was never overthrown. It was simply conquered from within. It was divided. And this fourth beast has 10 horns.
And we know that Rome was taken over by tribes, by Germanic tribes that have now occupied Europe, all of Europe.
Rome was divided. Well, I wonder what the prophecy says about that. Verse 41. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, look at these 5 words. The kingdom shall be divided. The kingdom shall be what? Divided. The kingdom will be divided. In other words, there will not be a conquering of this fourth iron kingdom, but the division of it. The kingdom will be divided.
So you see, all of this is very, very fascinating, very intricate history and power play. When you read it, it's just absolutely dramatic and fascinating. But the more you get into it, the more you see how the book of Daniel was very, very accurate, not only in Daniel 2, but in the expansion in Daniel 7.
This interpretation of Daniel chapter 7, the lion, the bear, the leopard, the indescribable, scary beast, the fourth beast, this interpretation of that big Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, this is not some fanciful new interpretation. This has actually been a part of Christian interpretation of Bible prophecy for a very long time.
For example, when you go to Nuremberg, one of the cities in Germany, you have the Rathaus there. It's the mayor's residence. And there they put up statues of the 4 pictures in stone of these 4 beasts.
These very beasts that we're describing here. You have the lion with eagle's wings, and you have the bear that's got the 3 ribs in the mouth. You also see the 4-headed leopard with the 4 wings, and then this ferocious, strange beast with 10 horns. And in every one of those sculptures of the 4 beasts, just beside the sculpture is a soldier or a prominent person from that time era. So for example, what you find with the lion with eagle's wings is here's a Babylonian-looking gentleman. Some have suggested maybe it was Nebuchadnezzar himself. Then when you go, of course, to the bear with the 3 ribs, you see a Medo-Persian figurine right there. Then you go to the leopard with the 4 heads and the 4 wings. You see a figure that looks very much like what we might imagine Alexander the Great looking like, and obviously a Greek soldier. And then the ferocious beast, you see the 10 horns, and then a Roman soldier.
So here you have, if you please, an interpretation of Daniel 7 in stone. So you can see that this is not an obscure interpretation.
So this is not something new or something novel. This interpretation is the time-honored, and frankly, it is the historically verified application of this prophecy. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, the division of Rome. But where in Daniel chapter 2, the next thing that we see is the division of Rome into its various parts, some strong, some weak. We also see that in Daniel chapter 7, but there's some additional information that is here added. And that gets us right to the heart of what we're talking about, and that's the Antichrist.
People who have taken the Bible seriously have always understood Daniel chapter 7 this way. Take Hippolytus. He lived in the late 2nd century, early 3rd century. Listen to what he had to say. The golden head of the image and the lioness denoted the Babylonians. The shoulders and the arms of silver and the bear represented the Persians and Medes. The belly and thighs of brass and the leopard meant the Greeks, who held sovereignty from Alexander's time. The legs of iron and the beast, dreadful and terrible, expressed the Romans, who hold sovereignty at present. the toes of the feet, which were part clay and part iron, and the 10 horns were emblems of the kingdoms that are yet to arise. The other little horn that grows up among them meant the Antichrist in their midst. The stone that smites the earth and brings judgment upon the world was Christ. Hippolytus is saying here very clearly in his day that he is living in the time of that fourth beast, that the 10 kingdoms have not yet arisen, and that the Antichrist has not yet come.
And it is truly fascinating that even before our time, hundreds of years ago, this vision was being understood. Was being understood as a description of history foretold.
Serious Bible students have always understood where they're at in the flow of human history. Whether it was Jesus making it clear where he was in Daniel's prophecies, or Bible students like Hippolytus